All right. I think we can get started here. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, get back to slide number one here. So I start from the beginning. I just wanted to welcome everybody to the webinar tonight. Tonight is a webinar titled Standardized Testing and Dyslexia. And we're so glad to have you here tonight. We really appreciate the fact that you took time out of your schedule to be with us here for this webinar, and we really appreciate it. So welcome, and we hope you really enjoy it and find the webinar very informative tonight. I thought I would start by introducing myself. My name is Peter Groth. I'm the founder and CEO of Dyslexia Connect Online Tutoring, which I started in 2010. I was trained in a method called the Orton-Gillingham method in 2004. And Orton-Gillingham is a very well-known method for working with students who have dyslexia and other reading difficulties to help them improve their reading and their spelling. So I was trained in that in 2004 and worked as a dyslexia tutor in person for a number of years, and then started Dyslexia Connect in 2010 and worked with quite a few students online after that as well. And in total, I have about 22 years of experience working with students who have dyslexia. Thought I'd provide a little bit of info about Dyslexia Connect online tutoring. We provide online dyslexia tutoring to families and to school districts. So if you're interested in that at all, we'd love to have you check us out at our website, which is dyslexiaconnect.com. And Natalie's going to be putting that into the chat. We do offer a free trial with no obligation of our online tutoring program. And that includes a free trial session as well as a free report, which really helps to highlight the areas that a student is struggling in and the things that could help them make progress in their reading and spelling. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out on our website and sign up for a free trial. I thought I'd go over the objectives for today. So for my presentation, I'm going to be going over some general info about standardized testing, talking about challenges for a student with dyslexia in standardized testing, how to help a student with dyslexia prepare, what teachers can look for during testing, some things to keep in mind after testing, some really good standardized testing accommodations that I like that I think are very helpful, and also talking about analyzing testing results once you get those testing results back. And we are going to have the presentation, which will last about probably 25 to 30 minutes. And after that, we're going to have time for questions, probably 20 or 30 minutes for questions. And I'm very happy to be joined by Natalie today from the Dyslexia Connect administrative staff. Natalie is a former teacher and dyslexia tutor with a wealth of experience and education about working with students who have dyslexia, and she's going to be helping to answer your questions today. If you do have a question, we would like to ask that you please submit that using the chat feature in Zoom. And when you do that, if you use the Everyone tab when you submit your question, we would really appreciate it. When you click Everyone, everybody in the webinar is going to be able to see your question. So I will be able to see it, Natalie will be able to, and all of our other attendees will be able to see it as well. And that really helps us to keep track of the questions since they're all coming in one chat thread. And also, it has the benefit of helping a lot of other people who are attending because if you're asking a certain question during the webinar, it's very likely that somebody else also has the same question. So if they ask their question and you see it and they're able to get an answer, that may answer more of your questions tonight as well. So it's very helpful that way. If you wouldn't mind, we would like to ask that you please include your role when you ask a question. So if you, for example, are a teacher who works with students who have dyslexia, if you can mention that when you ask your question, or if you are a parent who has a child with dyslexia, if you can mention that. And that additional information really helps us to tailor our response to you. So hopefully we're giving you information that's the most useful to you. There is going to be a recording of the webinar available, and we're going to be sending that out via email to everyone who registered for the webinar tonight. So you'll probably be receiving that, I think, on Monday in an email, and then you can feel free to rewatch the webinar if you want to, or rewatch sections of it if you'd like to do that. One of the reasons why I really love doing these webinars is that we have a lot of attendees who also have a great amount of knowledge about dyslexia and various school matters. And so, one of the great things about this is that we can all get together and help answer each other's questions and provide info. And I really tend to learn a lot during these webinars as well, which is really great. So it's a nice opportunity to be able to share information. As mentioned in the advertising for this webinar, we are offering a professional development certificate if you are a teacher or paraprofessional who would like to use this webinar as a professional development hour. This is available to anyone who attends the full live webinar tonight. And if you would like to request a certificate, you can contact us from the Dyslexia Connect website, which is dyslexiaconnect.com, and ask for a certificate. To request that from the website, you can click on any of the buttons that say free trial because those buttons all pull up our contact forms and you can contact us from there. Or you can also go specifically to the contact page and use the contact form on there. Unfortunately, we are not able to provide a certificate in response to requests in the chat during the webinar. So if you would like a professional development certificate, please email us off of our website. We'll be happy to get back to you about that. I also wanted to mention we host a lot of webinars during the school year, and our next webinar is going to be in June. It's titled Dyslexia and Avoiding the Summer Slump. So, if you are a parent or teacher or school administrator and you're looking for ways to help students avoid the summer slump, I really think that you'll find this helpful. The summer slump is something that is really difficult for students with dyslexia and something that can sometimes affect them if they aren't getting practice with reading and spelling during the summer. Something that we see sometimes is that a student will, be in school or be in tutoring up until May or June, and then they'll quit for 2 or 3 months during the summer and then come back. And quite often, there's a lot of review that's needed to get them back to the point where they were before they paused for the summer. And so this webinar is going to give a lot of good tips about activities that you can do, different things you can focus on during the summer to hopefully help students maintain their reading and spelling abilities during the summer and to avoid the summer slump. And Natalie is going to put that link into the chat right now if you would like to sign up for that. It's a free webinar, just like this is. So we would love to have you attend that webinar if you're interested. So I thought we'd start with some general info about standardized testing. So some info on the origins of standardized testing. Annual standardized testing was introduced through the federal No Child Left Behind Act of 2001. Under this law, schools were required to create and give assessments to all students at certain grade levels in order to receive federal funding. Test results and testing is on a bell curve for standardized and state testing. So what that means is that results are compared between students who were tested. So if you look at this graphic right here, we have this bell curve, and in the middle we have average performers on the test, and then to the left we have people who are lower performing than that and higher performing than that on the specific exam. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're looking at testing results. There's a lot of computer adaptive testing that is used for state standardized testing these days. This means that as the test progresses, questions get easier or more difficult based on whether or not the student is choosing the correct answers. So that means when a student is doing one of these tests, a computer adaptive test, one student may not be seeing the same questions that the other student is because that student may get a more difficult or an easier question based on how they answer the current question that they just did or the question they just completed, I should say. When we talk about scoring for state tests and standardized tests, we talk about percentile score. And I thought it would be helpful to talk about percentile score and percentile rank because this can be kind of a confusing concept. I remember a while ago, I looked up some information on it because I wasn't totally sure what was meant by percentile rank or score and who is above it, who is below it, how to read those results. And so this is a helpful graphic, I think. A score percentile represents the percentage of scores that are equal or below a certain score with a given sample. For example, the 75th percentile SAT score for incoming freshmen is 1400. That means that 75% of the students scored 1400 or below on their SAT. And that also means that 25% of students scored above 1400 on that test. So that's something helpful to keep in mind with percentiles. There are a lot of challenges for a student with dyslexia when it comes to state testing. First of all, a student with dyslexia may feel very, very anxious before a big state standardized test. The student may worry about failing a standardized test or possibly disappointing their parents and teachers. And this can lead to a lot of anxiety about the test. Students with dyslexia may feel anxious. They may get stomach aches when they're talking about the test or the day of the test because they feel really anxious about it. And this is a pretty common thing that we see. Another challenge is that the test is a change of routine. Many students with dyslexia enjoy routine and knowing what to expect during the day. The change of routine for testing day can be difficult because, of course, normally when a student goes to school, they're used to the normal routine. They get dropped off, they have a certain subject first, maybe a break, they do another subject. Everything's pretty routine and expected in their daily studying. And of course, on a day where there's a test, this can be very, very different. They might show up at class, be in the classroom for 20 minutes, then have to go for the test. The time for breaks might be different during the day. And so this can be really stressful because a lot of students with dyslexia really love routine, and having something that puts them out of their normal routine can make them feel anxious and a little bit discombobulated sometimes. Another challenge is that a student with dyslexia may lack confidence in reading. And of course, difficulty with reading is one of the primary symptoms of dyslexia. And of course, if a student lacks confidence in reading, the idea of going into an exam that is tons and tons of reading can be really scary and intimidating for them. They may feel like they aren't going to be able to read fast enough. They won't be able to keep up. They might not be able to complete as much of the test as they're supposed to in the time limit. So that can be stressful. Here are some things to help a student with dyslexia prepare for standardized testing, make them feel more comfortable. Keep the routine. Keep the routine at home and in the classroom as close to normal as possible during testing days. It's often, of course, not possible to keep it exactly the same, and it may have to be quite different, but anything that you can do to make the routine at home for parents or relatively similar at school for teachers, that's going to help kids with dyslexia feel more comfortable and be less anxious. So, if you can have some familiar things during the day that they're used to and that they expect during their school day, that's going to help. You can also do a trial run. In the classroom, you can do a trial run of what testing will look like, model how the student will log in to the program if they're using a computer adaptive test. You can walk through expectations and problem solving, what type of questions they'll be seeing on the test, what it will look like. Also, just basic logistics, like answering their questions about what they do if they need to go to the restroom or get a drink or take breaks. Talking about these things ahead of time and answering these questions will really help them feel less anxious because they won't have so many things spinning in their heads about, oh, what do I do? What do I do if I'm super tired and I just need to take a break for a few minutes? Or what happens if I get really thirsty? What do I do then? So covering all the bases like that is going to help them feel more comfortable and at ease. Practice tests are also really beneficial. Many states offer practice tests that can be used to discuss test taking strategies and or calming strategies while taking the test. These are also really helpful to show the possible format of questions to students before the test. I remember when I was preparing to take the ACT many years ago, and I took lots and lots of practice tests, and it was so beneficial because I felt like every time I did a practice test, I was able to get a sense of the timing, how long I was taking on certain questions, how much time I had for certain sections. And it also helped me to get really, really familiar with the form and the structure of the questions. So by the time I got to the actual test, the format, the way it was set up, how it looked, the style of questions, those things were all familiar to me. So it wasn't like a completely big surprise when I did the actual test. And you can do the same for students with dyslexia by getting some of these practice tests and going through them and helping them to be comfortable with the format and the style of the questions. Another great thing to do is to confirm testing accommodations. Confirm whether or not the student has testing accommodations from an IEP or 504. If the student has testing accommodations, make sure they know how and when to use them. Because of course, if they have accommodations available, but they're not using them, then they aren't going to do them any good. Another tip is to talk to the student about the test. Sometimes when things aren't talked about and they're a big deal, they can make students really, really nervous. So talk about what the test will be like and reassure the students about the progress that they have made. You can also tell them that the test will assist teachers in knowing how to teach them, that it will help teachers learn a lot more about that student and be able to teach them more effectively. And that way, it takes pressure off the student because we're telling them that this is really a beneficial thing to help us learn how to teach you. And it's not something where it's this huge thing that they have to pass or fail. It's more of a learning tool, which should help them feel better about it. Natalie is going to put an article in the chat now that has more information about test anxiety and how to help students feel less anxious before testing. So I thought we'd go over some things that teachers can look for and maybe notice during testing. So one thing is you might notice that classroom schedule changes the mood of a student. You may notice that being out of the normal routine can affect a student. They may seem kind of sad or just a little bit detached, and that is often because the schedule changes required by testing cause students with dyslexia to feel a little bit out of it and a little bit nervous. You can also check to see which accommodations the student is using during the test. This can be really helpful because a student might have a lot of different accommodations available, but if they have five accommodations that they are able to use and you only notice them using one of them or two of them during the test, that may give you information about which kind of accommodations are helpful to them. And you can also have a conversation with a student about, hey, I noticed you were using this accommodation a lot, but you didn't use this one. Is there a reason for that? Do you like this one particularly? And that can be helpful info. And when you get that information, you can notice, of course, which accommodations were not utilized and think about other accommodations that may be beneficial to the student. And this is something that may be considered to change in an IEP or 504 plan. So, why don't some students use their accommodations? This is a phenomenon that happens. A student may have a lot of accommodations available, but they might not use them. So, what are some reasons for that? Well, there are a lot of different possible reasons a student may not use their accommodations, and here are just some of them. They don't want to stand out or feel different during the test or the project they're doing. They don't think it will help or understand how it will help. They don't know how to ask for the accommodation. Maybe they go into the test and the accommodation isn't given to them right away and they don't feel comfortable asking for it or they're nervous to ask for it. They may be unsure how to use the accommodation and how to use it effectively on the test, or they might not feel like the accommodation is helpful. How can we help with this? Well, we can help by discussing the accommodations that the student is going to be able to use on the test with them ahead of time. We can explain to the student why the accommodations will be useful and how they will be useful. We can also practice using the accommodations with the student so that they're familiar with them and know how they work. And we can also explain to the students how to ask for their accommodations in case they aren't automatically provided. And there's an article about this from Understood actually that Natalie is going to be putting in the chat about, reasons students may not use accommodations, and you can read up on that more if you're interested. So, something to keep in mind after testing, it's really good to radiate positivity like this graphic after testing is done. We uh we want students to feel good after the test and feel good about all the effort they made. And so we can praise them for working so hard at it and trying so hard and focusing well on it. And we want to make sure that we reinforce that with a lot of positivity so that, of course, the next time the testing comes around, they will feel good about doing it, or at least won't feel as anxious about the next test approaching. So we really want to compliment them for how hard they worked and their efforts with the test. I thought we would talk a little bit about standardized testing accommodations. There are some accommodations that are really helpful that I thought I would mention. And if the student is able to use these, is allowed to use these through their 504 or IEP, they might be really helpful on the big state test. And of course, the first step in this is just to confirm whether they have accommodations available on tests from the IEP or 504. Accommodations should be routinely used before being used with standardized testing. And this way, the student will be familiar with them and will be able to use them effectively. It's not likely that a student will be able to jump into a big standardized test and effectively use an accommodation that they've never used before or are unsure how to use. And so it's really good to just use that accommodation and practice with it, doing a lot of different things so that by the time they get to the test, they're really ready to go. It should be noted, I should say, that some accommodations cannot be used on tests. There are some accommodations that can only be used during instruction and not during testing. And so there might be something in the 504 or the IEP that the student can use when they're doing homework or doing projects in school, but it's not available or it cannot be used according to the state laws on the standardized test. So it's important to check out the accommodations that a student has available and check to see which ones are allowed on standardized tests and which ones are not. There often is a list of accommodations available. So, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which provides for IEPs and 504 plans, requires each state to provide a list of accommodations that can be used during standardized testing. So schools typically have this, or school district offices, or of course, you could always also check with a state education agency or department to see if they can provide that list as well. And this can be really, really good because you can just take a look at the big list and say, well, my student has these accommodations on their 504 or their IEP. Is this one allowed? Yep, that one is. This one isn't. That one is. And that can help a lot in figuring out which ones are available for use on standardized testing. Since so much standardized testing is done on computer these days, some accommodations may already be built into the application. So there might be highlighters that are built in that a student can use. There might be some text-to-speech features to have text read aloud to the student, and different things like that already built into the software. And speaking of that, whether the test is on a computer or on paper, a highlighter is really helpful to students with dyslexia. They can use the highlighter to mark certain things, to sort of track where they're at if they want to mark once they're done with a section and going on to a next section. They can mark items that they're maybe confused about that they want to come back to later, or if they're reading a big passage, they can circle something. If they're like, I don't know what that is, I need to come back to that later, they can circle it and come back to it easily. So a highlighter is really, really helpful, whether it's the digital version or the analog version used on paper. Text to speech is also really helpful, something that reads text aloud to the student. As we mentioned, one of the primary symptoms of dyslexia is difficulty with reading. And of course, reading huge chunks of text on a standardized test can be really difficult for a student with dyslexia and might take them much longer than a student who does not have dyslexia. So, this is an accommodation. A lot of computer programs that are used for testing might have this accommodation built in so that the text can be read aloud to the students. That can be very helpful. Also, extra time on tests. This is a great accommodation for dyslexia, no matter what age the student is. By giving them extra time on exams and standardized tests and quizzes, you're going to help them to be much less anxious going into the test because they aren't going to feel like they're going to be really rushed and under the clock to try to complete things faster than they are able to. So with extra time, they'll feel like they have the time they need to read sections in the test and also reread them, which is sometimes necessary for some students. And this is a great accommodation. They'll feel less nervous. They will often give more accurate results on the test that, of course, help us to get a better snapshot of what the student actually knows because they'll have extra time and feel comfortable and be able to answer things. So that's a great accommodation. A calculator is also a really beneficial accommodation for the math sections on a standardized test. Small group or individual testing can be really, really good. Sometimes, if standardized testing is given in a big room with lots and lots of desks and lots of students at once, that can be really intimidating for a student with dyslexia. And if possible, they sometimes do better in a small group or individual testing arrangement. So maybe they can take the test with some of their friends from their class in the classroom, or maybe individually, just in a quiet area. And that's going to help them to focus more and help them feel less nervous. Now, a few things about analyzing testing results. So, results may vary with standardized testing for students with dyslexia. Results may not be an accurate representation of student performance or growth for a student with dyslexia. So, why is that? Well, There, of course, are a lot of reasons why students with dyslexia struggle with tests. We mentioned some of those already. So here are some of the reasons why those testing results may not reflect how well the student is actually doing or may not be an accurate picture of how they are doing. Um, First of all, students with dyslexia tend to have a difficult time with high pressure exams. And standardized testing often feels very high pressure and stressful to them. So that might cause them to have difficulty with it. Also, normal accommodations that a student with dyslexia has on tests and exams may not be provided on standardized tests. So they may have some things that they normally use for instruction that are available that really help them when they're doing homework and school projects and assignments, but those accommodations aren't allowed on the standardized test, and so suddenly they have to do that without that available. And that can be pretty jarring if they're used to being able to use those accommodations, and suddenly they get this test which is much bigger than most tests they take, and they can't use that accommodation. So for that reason, scores may be lower than expected. Also, reading comprehension skills are a factor. The ELA, or reading portion of the test, assesses reading comprehension skills. If a student with dyslexia struggles with reading fluency or decoding words, they will probably not be able to decode the text well or be able to read the text well, which can lead to guesses in comprehension. Something we look at a lot with the students we work with is reading accuracy percentages. And if you have a student read something and check their reading accuracy, you might notice that they're only reading with 70% accuracy or 65% accuracy. And you can imagine when they are reading a big comprehension section and they are asked to absorb all the details and respond about those details, if they're only reading at 65, 70%, 75%, they're going to be missing a lot of pieces in that comprehension section, and they're going to have a really difficult time answering questions accurately. And as a result, they're probably going to have to end up guessing at a lot of answers, which can lead to low scores. So, how do we accurately test reading for students with dyslexia? Well, we can accurately assess reading progress for students with dyslexia by using specific tests that are benchmarked. And what that means is that when we're using a benchmark test, we start out by testing the student's skills, and we make note of the areas that they're doing well in and the areas they're struggling in. For example, we might assess their reading and their decoding ability and notice, well, they're really struggling with short vowel sounds right now. They're doing okay with consonants, but struggling with short vowel sounds. And then there's another test after a certain period of time that tests those same things, and we benchmark it on that first test. So we see, well, how's the student doing with short vowels now? Okay, they've improved in a couple of these areas, but are still struggling with this one. And that way, it's very cumulative. We're testing the student in the beginning to benchmark where they are at, and then we are judging their progress based on that benchmarked test in the beginning. This tends to give a much more accurate picture of how a student with dyslexia is making progress. If a student with dyslexia has a low score on a standardized test, there are some areas to examine. So, one beneficial thing is to look at each area of reading and see if instructional support can be provided based on areas of need. One of these areas is phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness just refers to the sounds that letters and letter combinations make. If students have weak skills in this area, they're going to be guessing at lots of words. They won't be able to properly read certain words. And in general, they're going to have a really difficult time trying to read any words that they haven't memorized the shape of, or seen a lot before. Also, their decoding ability which is the ability to read words using their phonemic awareness, phonetic knowledge, and also their knowledge of different syllable types. Encoding, which we also call spelling, that is their ability to take phonetic sounds and put them together to correctly spell words. Then we have fluency, which looks at the amount of or the speed at which a student is reading, and also the accuracy that they are reading with. As I mentioned before, reading accuracy is a really, really important issue. And when we look at fluency, we see how fast a student is able to read a passage and also how accurately they're reading, because we want to make sure that they are really able to read very, very accurately to be able to absorb the information. We also want to look at their comprehension. And of course, if these other areas above comprehension are something that things that the student's struggling with, then comprehension is going to be a struggle as well. Because if their reading fluency is not good, they're going to struggle with being able to read the words and properly absorb the information. And also vocabulary. This is an important area to look at. Something we notice with students who have dyslexia is that their vocabulary sometimes lags behind their peers simply for the reason that reading is so difficult for them. So they aren't reading the same amount and volume of material that their classmates are. And so vocabulary can be an issue. Also, sometimes students will maybe think they know certain vocabulary, but in fact, they're going to have the wrong meaning for those words. And this can cause issues with comprehension as well. So those are all good areas to look at. Something to keep in mind is that testing results are like a snapshot. It's a snapshot of a student's skills on a given day. It's not an overall picture of how their entire school year went or how they're doing in the classroom every day. It is a snapshot, so it's important to keep that perspective. It's also important to keep the big picture in mind, of course. Regardless of a student's score on a standardized test, it's important to look at how they're doing in school. Do they like school? Do they seem to be enjoying it? How do their teachers feel like they're doing? Are they participating in class? Have teachers really seen improvement in certain areas? It's possible that their teachers have seen improvement, but that improvement didn't show up on the test, even though it is very real and it has been something that they have accomplished. Well, if you'd like some more information, general information about dyslexia, you can find a lot of dyslexia info on our website, dyslexiaconnect.com. Here's a picture of our homepage. If you go to our homepage and click on the menu bar item that says Guide to Dyslexia, that has a lot of information about dyslexia, signs and symptoms of dyslexia, signs of dyslexia at different ages, an article about whether dyslexia is genetic, and some different things like that. So you'd probably find that really helpful if you're looking for information. Also, I wanted to mention the Dyslexia Connect YouTube channel. We have a channel with a video blog about dyslexia that has lots of different videos on it. Some of them you'll probably find really helpful. There are videos about dyslexia accommodations, how dyslexia is evaluated and diagnosed, symptoms of dyslexia, um, various things like that. And so Natalie's going to put that in the chat in case you're interested in checking that out. Also, she's going to put one more link in the chat, which is a blog entry on our website that's titled "Help My Child Did Poorly on State Testing." There's a blog article with information about that, and also a video that talks about state testing and why students with dyslexia often struggle on that. Well, we've gotten to the time for our raffle. So as we mentioned in the advertising, we are going to be giving out a $50 Amazon gift card tonight. So Natalie has entered the name of our attendees into a randomizer, and she's going to choose one name using that to receive the gift card. So the way this is going to work is that Natalie's going to put a name in the chat, and we ask that the winner of the gift card respond in the chat box within 2 minutes just to confirm that you are present and that you're here to win the gift card. If we don't receive confirmation in 2 minutes, Natalie's going to pick another name, and we'll keep doing that until we have somebody confirm that they are in the webinar with us right now in attendance. And then after that name is picked, then we'll get the gift card sent out to you via email in the next couple of days. All right. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending tonight. And I wanted to mention that if you're interested in more information, of course, you can visit us at dyslexiaconnect.com. We're also very active on Facebook and Instagram. We post a lot of information about dyslexia on those channels, probably 4 or 5 times per week. We post different graphics and information about dyslexia. So we'd love to have you follow us on those if you are interested. Those are also a great way to keep up to date with upcoming webinars because we announce those webinars on Facebook and Instagram. So if you follow us on there, you'll get the notification about upcoming webinars like our one in June, for example, that we talked about already. And also we'd love to have you check us out on YouTube. We've got lots of videos about dyslexia on YouTube. All right. Well, I think we'll open the floor for questions now. I'm just going to go ahead and stop my screen sharing. I'll take a look and see if we have any questions in the chat we want to go over here. Okay. All right. Natalie, did you see any questions so far?
C1 just came in that says, may I ask, what do you do if a student has speech to text in their accommodation, but are unable to do that in their classroom? What are some suggestions for using that common accommodation for students who have dyslexia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, if they have that in the accommodation, but it's not happening in the classroom, it's probably a good opportunity to talk to a school administrator about that and or a special education teacher and mention that the student does have this accommodation, but it seems like it's not being allowed in the classroom despite the fact that it's in there. And legally, if an accommodation is in an IEP or a 504, it legally has to be allowed in the classroom while the student is working. So definitely check with the school about that because if it's available and it's on the 504 IEP, then it should be used in the classroom and should be available. Do you have anything to add about that, Natalie?
No, I was going to say the same thing that you did. Talk to someone about adding that in because I feel like that is a very important accommodation that a student should have.
Yeah, for sure. Voice to text and text to speech or read aloud apps are both really, really helpful for students with dyslexia. Speech to text, of course, can help a lot when they're doing writing assignments or they're doing homework. And text to speech is great because they are able to have things read aloud to them. And what's nice these days is text to speech options are much more available than they used to be. I think they're built into Chrome now. The browser Windows has it built in as well. And so if the student's using any sort of laptop or Chromebook or anything like that, there are a lot of opportunities for those things to be used. So they're more available than they used to. They used to require often specific software that would have to do that work, but they're built in much more than they used to be. Let's see. Look and see if we have any other questions here.
Mm.
Let's see. Schools. Let's see. Belvina asked, is there a flyer or information for the schools when we parents decline testing? Um, That's a good question. So I'm not sure about this. I believe when a parent does decline testing at school, I think they just need to state that or put that in writing on a document. Is that right in your experience, Natalie? If a parent decides to
Can you
do
repeat?
that?
Can you repeat the question again? I was picking the raffle winner.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Um, yeah, Belvina was asking, is there a flyer or information for the schools when we parents decline testing? So if a parent declines testing, um, as far as I know, they just need to state that to the school, maybe put it in writing.
Yes, I would put it in writing and maybe contact the State Department of Education. There might be some paperwork to fill out as well.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yep. Thanks, Natalie. Let's see. I was gonna look for some other questions here. All right. And okay. Oh, okay. I have a question from Ernestina here. She says, I'm a high school teacher with dyslexic learners, but they are not officially tested, as such, only based on our observations. What are the screening equipment I can use? So that's a great question. That's a great question. So official testing or evaluation for students with dyslexia that can actually provide a diagnosis of dyslexia, those are required to be used by a psychologist or doctor who specializes in learning issues. So, an official diagnosis of dyslexia requires working with a psychologist, psychiatrist, or a doctor to test that. And they have a very specific battery of tests that they use. Sometimes it can last, I think, several hours during a day to formally test a student for dyslexia. Um, in the case where you're just trying to figure out whether a student has dyslexia, I would say one of the most helpful things is to just read up on signs and symptoms of dyslexia and see if a student is displaying a lot of those issues. And in fact, I should mention that at Dyslexia Connect, a lot of our students in our tutoring program do not have a diagnosis of dyslexia. They're they're simply they simply noticed and read up on dyslexia and noticed that their student has a lot of those signs and symptoms and actually sought out dyslexia tutoring for that reason because they read about the signs and they thought, yeah, this explains exactly how my child is struggling and what I've been seeing all these years. And even though the student doesn't have a diagnosis of dyslexia, they still realize that that's what the issue is and they get them help for that reason. And I also wanted to mention that a diagnosis of dyslexia is not necessary to be able to give a student exactly what they need to help them improve in their reading and spelling. The methods that are used to help students with dyslexia improve in their reading and spelling, like the Orton-Gillingham method and methods in the Orton-Gillingham family, are highly effective for any students, whether they have dyslexia or not. And so, if you notice that a student's struggling, you can use instruction based in that method, and it's effective for them whether or not they have dyslexia. So, a diagnosis of dyslexia is not necessary to really work with a student and help them make improvements. But as I mentioned, if you're kind of wondering, does this student have dyslexia or not, but they haven't been formally tested and they might not be undergoing a formal test or evaluation, I would suggest reading up on the signs and symptoms of dyslexia, and that will help you determine, whether it seems like that's what's going on. Let's see. Oh, and Heather mentioned in California, we can now have our school psychologist diagnose students. Thanks for that information, Heather. That's really, really good to know. I did not
Oh,
realize that
great.
actually. So that's really good to know. Let's see. All right. going to see if we have some other questions here. And there was a really helpful mention here in the chat that state testing varies state to state, actually, as well as the accommodations that are allowed on state testing or are not allowed. And so it can be kind of challenging if you're looking for an overall picture of what state testing looks like in every state when it rolls around in the spring. Since it does vary a lot, if you're looking for specific information, it's beneficial to check into that and look at what the specific state requirements are and what they use for state testing, whether they do it with computer adaptive testing or they do it with paper tests and different things like that. And uh, as far as finding information like that, I wanted to mention an organization that can be really helpful. There's an organization called Decoding Dyslexia, actually, that has different chapters in every state. And they can be really helpful to provide information about different standardized testing, what the dyslexia laws are in a certain state. And if you're looking for info, I would suggest checking with the chapter, your chapter in your state, because they can often provide a really good information.
The question came in through the hosts and panelists. It says, if a student scores low in reading on standardized testing, what could be a next step to support the child in their learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would recommend looking at the areas I mentioned in that one slide. If they're scoring low on reading, what we really want to do is take a look at the different areas of reading that determine whether a student is a good reader or is struggling. So we want to look at their knowledge of phonics, the sounds that letters and letter combinations make, also their knowledge of syllable rules, closed syllables, silent E syllables, open syllables. We want to look at their decoding or reading skills. We want to present them with words and see how they are at being able to look at a word and read it. Um, Something that students with dyslexia often use as a coping mechanism, if they haven't had instruction that really teaches them to be able to correctly decode words, they often fall back on guessing at words. And this is a coping mechanism that can get really ingrained, actually. And sometimes, um, even after a student starts getting instruction to help them improve their reading in Orton Gillingham or a method like that, it can often take months to help them get out of that habit of guessing at words since they have gotten into it so much. And it often becomes a coping mechanism because they don't have the knowledge they need to be able to properly decode and read words. And so they start guessing at them. And often they'll guess at them based on the first couple letters of the word, or maybe the shape of the word, or the length of the word. And as you can imagine, the more a student guesses at a word, the lower their reading accuracy is going to be, and the more problems it's going to cause on reading tests. So yeah, looking at that, looking at reading fluency, um, and some different areas like that, all those components that make up reading. Take a look at all of those because those are a good first step to check out if a student is struggling in reading and has done poorly on a test. Also, related to that, I wanted to mention have the student read out loud. That's really helpful because you can get a really good idea. If you have a student read a passage and ask them how hard it was, you might not really know how well they were reading it, how accurately they were reading it. Have them read the passages out loud, and you're going to notice immediately if you follow along whether they are struggling, whether they are reading really slowly, whether they're being really stumped by words they're coming across, and that's going to tell you a lot.
We had a question. Let me find it again. Oh, I am a parent of a 13-year-old. He keeps asking if he can skip the testing due to his dyslexia. Do you think it's still important for him to do the testing?
That's a really great question, and I definitely understand that because testing can be so stressful for students
Mhm.
with dyslexia. So, um, since testing is often helpful really helpful to teachers and for teachers to look at and to get a picture of kind of how the student is doing overall. A first step I would recommend is trying to get that student accommodations to make testing a lot more comfortable for them. And if there's anything that can be done to help lower their anxiety about testing and to feel a lot better about it and to feel like it's not really a big deal, it's just something we do annually to get some more information that helps teachers out, I think that would be a good first step. As far as actual exceptions, that probably depends on whether that is allowed in the state for students to be exempted from state testing. I have heard of situations in which that is allowed and sometimes situations in which it's not allowed. So I would talk with if you try some other things and it seems like it's just not going well, he's still super, super nervous about it. I would try talking with the school administration about that and see what's required for a student to be able to opt out of a state test, or whether that's even an option under state law. Would you have anything to add about that, Natalie?
I agree with you. I was going to say just maybe worth talking with the school team, his teachers, the administration, maybe the counselor, ask what accommodations he's approved for and whether he's already using some of those in class so he understands them and is comfortable with them, and how
Yep.
he can be emotionally supported during testing. Because we don't want to push him through something stressful. We
Yeah.
just make sure he has fair access and that his learning is understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe the environment can be changed as well for the
Hmm.
test. Maybe
Right,
he can take the test alone in a room, or maybe he can take the test with a group of his classmates that he likes and do it
right,
that way rather than having to take it in the normal environment. Like I mentioned during the presentation, if it's in a big room with tons of people, that can be intimidating.
right,
So
definitely.
something might like that might help as well. Yeah. Um, let's see. And yeah, Heather, thanks for your comment. That's really a great comment you put there. Um, you mentioned that as a teacher, I think testing is helpful for students to learn how to use their accommodations and have data to show progress. That's a really great point. Testing is a really great opportunity to be able to learn how to use accommodations well. Let's see. And Carly mentioned frequent monitor breaks and extended time are two examples of accommodations that are not allowed on a specific test that is read aloud to everyone in the class. And accommodations are supposed to level the playing field. Yeah, so as far as accommodations available, like I mentioned, you might need to check into um, which ones are available and which ones are not available in your state. And you should be able to get more information about that. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap things up tonight. So, again, thank you everybody for attending tonight. We're just so appreciative that you decided to be here with us and to attend this webinar. And thank you for spending the time. You will be receiving the recording of this. That'll be going out, I think, on Monday in an email. And we'd love to have you check us out at Dyslexia Connect if you would like to. And if you're interested, check out our webinar coming up in June. We'd love to see you there if you are able to be helpful. And also, thanks to everyone for your questions and all the helpful information that you shared with each other. That's really great. And I love doing these webinars and being able to come away having learned new things myself. So thanks everybody. I hope you have a great evening. Bye-bye.